March 2nd. Senator Burchard,
Here.
Senator Furphy,
Excused.
Senator Hutchings,
Here.
Senator McCune,
Here.
Chairman Baldwin.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum. Welcome everybody to Labor and Health. First item is we're going to shuffle the deck here. That always makes everybody's day exciting. We're going to shuffle the deck. First bill we're going to hear is House Bill 108, the funeral service practitioners. We'll follow that by Occupational Therapy Licensure Compact 117. And we'll tie up the loose ends by hearing House Bill 110, Board of Psychology Behavior Analysts. And those adjustments are made because we got people testifying all over in various committee rooms right now. So we're trying to accommodate for everybody. Dr. Hallinan was good enough to get up early this morning and come in because I think he's going to testify in another committee here shortly. So we're going to bring you up first, Dr. Hallinan. Go ahead and come up and occupy the warm seats. So the first one's House Bill 108, Funeral Service Practitioner Amendments. Welcome to Labor and Health on the good side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have never been to this committee before. So I appreciate your offer to your kindness in having me here first. I want to say hello to all the members of the committee also. And this bill is a fairly simple bill. It's a small bill. It's only 3 pages, 3 or 4 pages. And it's an act relating to funeral service practitioners, clarifying the definition of embalming, revising education requirements for funeral service practitioners, and revising the requirements for reciprocal licenses. That last item there is probably the most important part of this bill. The part about the definition of embalming is covered on page 2. It talks about the use of or application of chemical substances, fluids, or gases on the body, or by the introduction of the same into the body by vascular or hypodermic injection, or by direct introduction into organs or cavities, or by any other method or process. It also goes down, and the new item, the new part on that section is, it says that embalming does not include setting features for the purpose of identification of an unembalmed dead human body, or a disinfecting of a dead human body through non-arterial methods. And that's to differentiate what the assistants in the embalming process to do and what the actual embalmers do. So that opens it up for those kind of things by the assistant. Then on page 3, it crosses off the item about 60 hours, credit hours, at an accredited college or university in the United States, but says that the person has obtained an associate's or higher degree in funeral service practice or mortuary science from an American Board of Funeral Science Education accredited mortuary science program, or an equivalent program of funeral service education. Crosses off those items about the board may accept outside of the United States on a case-by-case basis. The next paragraph on that, beginning on line 18, is a new paragraph. It says that they have obtained a mortuary science diploma from an institution accredited by the American Board of Funeral Service Education, or an equivalent accreditation, and can show evidence of 5 years of experience in practicing funeral service in another jurisdiction, regardless of whether that jurisdiction has a formal license requirement or practice there. And then on page 4, if you read down there at the bottom, it says—
One second, Dr. Hallinan. Does anybody else have a page 4? Yeah, it's not on our paper copy for some reason. Okay, go ahead and describe it to us and we'll have Mike bring us a copy. Go ahead,
Okay.
Doctor.
On page 4, under section B, it says has been an active service practice licensee and has actually been engaged in funeral service practice for at least 5 years. And that's revised to say 3 years.
He's got
That person has been in practice for 3 years in a place where they have a license. And that's important. That's the one item that adds to the number of practitioners that are going to be available to come to Wyoming. They only have to have 3 years of practice in a place where they have a license.
Okay, yeah, we'll have a copy of that here shortly. Mike's gonna bring us a copy of that page 4. We don't have it at all. Yes, we only have up to page 3.
To page 3.
Yeah, we go to page 3. The last word is formal.
Well, that's probably the most important part of this bill is on page 4. The part about 3 years versus 5 years. Then on page 5, I'll just mention what's on page 5. And that they've been practicing funeral service in another jurisdiction that does not have formal licensing requirements for funeral service practice as defined by WS 33-16-502A XVII, or at least 5 years, for at least 5 years, and the applicant meets the education requirements specified by that same a new paragraph, WS 33-16-517A, 3A or B.
Okay, I've got a couple general questions we can start with here. Actually, Senator Hutchins has a question, so we'll go to her first.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Dr. Hallinan, it's so nice to see you up and about. I know you weren't feeling well, so good to see you in committee, sounding as strong as ever. I did have a question about the reduction of the number of years. So that on page 3 in the area, let me see, we go from line 4 to 16. I was wondering why you want to reduce the hours, credit hours, or just take them away. And then just wondered as well, is there a fear that we're not having people interested in this particular line of work? So the standards are kind of being reduced, or am I looking at it in the wrong way?
Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Hutchings. I think you're right that they have lowered their requirements some. They're trying to make the field a little bit less challenging. When they set these rules up, I think around 2014, and they set them up to be pretty strict at that time. And they were so strict that they had very few applicants that wanted to come to Wyoming. And so that's the reason for this change in the requirements. This is an unusual type of a new a way of addressing licensure. I have to say, I very seldom have seen any group come before us and say that they want to open up their practice a little bit to outsiders. But this bill does that, and that's why I signed on to be a sponsor for it.
It's always difficult when anybody opens up a practice act of any kind.
Gotcha.
It's a risk that you take, but go ahead, follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Doctor, on page 5, let me see, line 2, well, we'll start at 1. It says, practicing funeral service in another jurisdiction that does not have formal licensing requirements. Is that in addition to the standards kind of going down to get people in? Is that in addition to that? Does not require formal licensing in another jurisdiction?
Yeah.
Representative Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Hutchins. The state that does not have a formal licensing requirement that has a big impact in Wyoming is the state of Colorado. They do not have any licensing requirement for this field. And it was thought that by opening this up to some practitioners from Colorado, they would get some new people join us here in Wyoming. So
Thank you.
that's part of the reason for that.
Thank you. I have a feeling we'll get a lot more questions answered with some of our folks who'll come up and testify as well. This is a practice act that we don't see all that often. I think 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we opened up and changed some definitions. I don't even remember what the old definitions used to be, but they were pretty Wild West times. We changed a lot. So anyway, any further questions, committee, for Dr. Halloran? We'll get the copies as soon as they get it. Go ahead, Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While not being on this committee for very long, I'm just curious on the first page. What is it? It's on the second page. The changing to the definition of embalming. I'm curious, was there an issue that we need to have this new language? I don't understand any of that. So if you could help me with that.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Murphy, for that question. I think that the issue is that those items were being done by people other than the practitioner who's licensed. And they wanted to differentiate those kinds of services from the actual embalming. So that's why they put that part in there. They wanted to differentiate these two groups a little bit. So it's not embalming. It's just a minor things that are done by assistants that would work in the office.
Yeah, I have a feeling some of our future testimony here in a minute might clarify that a little bit for us.
Okay, thank you.
Say this is not an issue that we deal with often. So, okay, any further questions for Representative Halloran? Thank you, sir. Stand by. We may drag you back up here. Any of our departments wish to testify? Department of Health, no. No other departments want to testify this morning. So let's open this up for public comment. Come on up. Welcome to Labor and Health. Ms. Herbakite, we don't get to see you here often.
No, so excited. Get up this.
Welcome, and I'll let you three fight over the order you want to testify and just introduce yourself and go ahead and talk to us.
Mr. Chairman, Lori Herbakite, representing the Wyoming Funeral Directors Association. With me today, I have two practitioners who will be able to answer all those specific questions. We just wanted to let you know up front that we worked with the licensing board on this legislation, and they helped us with the language. Excuse me. We kept it very minimal. It only does three things, and that's the definition of the embalming, clarifying that, changing the education requirements so we can recruit more practitioners into Wyoming, and then allowing for some changes to the reciprocal licensing. So we kept it narrow on purpose because it is a budget session, and this is a critical issue for the funeral practitioners in Wyoming. And so with that, I'll stop and let the actual experts go next. Go ahead.
Bring it. Go
Good
ahead and
morning,
introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. My name is Jeff Jacoby. I'm a funeral service practitioner here in the city of Cheyenne. I am one of the owners of Schrader, Aragon, and Jacoby Funeral Home. And I also have a funeral home in Casper and also in Rollins as well. So I think there was a question in regards to the actual definition of embalming and why it was determined, at least from our standpoint, that it was important that the non-funeral service practitioner be able to set features and why it should be excluded from the definition of embalming. This becomes an important factor today, particularly as cremation rates are increasing throughout the United States, excuse me, particularly in the state of Wyoming. We have a very high cremation rate as it relates to the rest of the nation. And in the three counties in which I serve in, I'm finding that cremation rates are increasing. And because of that, families are choosing to not embalm as often. Embalming is not required in the instance where there's going to be a direct cremation, but we do have families that are choosing to have a viewing, or what we call an identification prior to cremation. And because of that, particularly in a small community like Rollins, Carbon County, where there's one funeral home and there's one funeral service practitioner that's actually actively managing that property, we find that sometimes that person likes to get away with his family and leave Rollins or Carbon County and do something. And so we need to make sure that we have sufficient staff there that can provide this help, these benefits for these families that are wanting a viewing prior to. He can do everything. My funeral assistant, who's not licensed, except for the fact, of course, he can't embalm. And currently, in my opinion, that also includes not setting features, the closing of the eyes, the mouth, to make the individual look as comfortable as possible. And so it's important that a non-funeral service practitioner have the ability to do that, to prepare that decedent so that the individual can be viewed prior to cremation. And then, of course, the cremation process would take place after that. So particularly in my instance, yes, it probably doesn't apply as much to Cheyenne and Casper, but as you know, there's many small communities throughout the state of Wyoming and small funeral homes and paw shops, if that's what you want to say. And so they may only have one funeral service practitioner there. So this gives those small funeral homes the ability to go ahead and actually prepare the decedents so that they are prepared. And of course, it could be a viewing or an identification before a direct burial as well without embalming. But I find in my situation, primarily it's those viewings or identifications prior to the cremation process.
Questions? Questions for Mr. Stobie?
Good explanation.
I have a question. Do you know the rates just off the top of your head for the national and state for cremation?
I'm good at, Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I'm going to probably speak off the cuff a little bit in regards to how it relates to me personally. Here in the city of Cheyenne, probably in the 75 to 80% rate, approximately. In Casper, you're approximately about the same, probably even maybe a little higher. And then in Rollins or in Carbon County, it's probably been closer to 80 to 85%. The national average, I would probably be misspeaking, but I would say it's probably in the 50 to 55% range. Would that be correct, Jamie?
Correct. Wow, very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions for Mr. Stobie? Oh, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Jamie Kirkland. I'm from Riverton. I'm a partner at Davis Funeral Home. So we also have these issues where we need someone that's not licensed if we're not in-house, or being that we have such a large county. I may be in Du Bois, Wyoming for the day at a funeral or on the reservation, someone passes away and the family immediately comes to the funeral home finding out their loved one has passed away and they want to see them. So it's hard to tell a family that they can't see their loved one until a funeral service practitioner is back in the building. So it'd be very helpful if this definition of embalming was altered, where we could do that and help a family see their loved one as quick as possible.
Go ahead, Senator Hutchins.
One more question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How much time does it take for you to train that assistant to do the embalming?
So we don't train those assistants to embalm.
Mhm.
In Wyoming, they have to be licensed as a licensed apprentice. So these assistants are not trained as embalmers at all.
Go ahead, Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, sir. So the assistant is just placing the body, like you say, in a comfortable position, pretty much. That's their duty. Thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Kirkland? I see none. And my only comment or question would be, and I ask a lot of questions because I say this is something we don't see often here. How many training programs are there in the United States for funeral practitioners?
Mr. Chairman, I'll answer that question. I believe there's over 40 schools to become a mortician. And that may have been a couple of years ago that I tracked that down. The closest being in Denver. There's Arapahoe Community College. Another one is in Salt Lake. Salt Lake Community College has a mortuary school program. There's mortuary school programs that are associated with college and universities. There's also private schools that are owned by chemical companies. And so that's kind of why we address some of our issues about making sure that folks have gone to an accredited mortuary science program.
Pretty good. Maybe we can get one in Wyoming one day. That'll be on the list. Any further questions, committee? Thank you very much.
Thank
Further
you.
public which wish to testify today? Seeing no one, I think you're off the hook, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your testimony. Do we have anyone online? No one online? Committee? What's your thoughts? Move the bill by Senator Hutchins, second by Senator Bouchard. Does- Any discussion? We'll get to the question. Any discussion? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Senator Bouchard.
You know, as we look at licensing, I can use real estate as an example. Real estate, you can't let anybody else do any of the sales. I mean, even if it's a phone call in an office, they can't even pick up the phone and talk about, you know, a potential real estate transaction. It's so restrictive that you can't even bring helpers in and have have direct control over them. This bill goes in the right direction because it's certainly a place where not everybody's geared to this type of business. And quite frankly, there's a lot of people who go to school and they may not be the right fit. So I think it gives them the opportunity to get people in and see if they're the right ones to bring in and spend the time and money, their own resources to bring them up through the ranks. So I think it's a great idea.
Very good. Let's go ahead and take roll.
House Bill 108, Senator Bouchard.
Aye.
Senator Murphy. Senator Hutchins. Senator McCune.
Aye.
Chairman Baldwin.
Aye.
The 5 ayes.
Very good. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Dr. Halloran. I see there's only one senator signed on here. Have you talked to her about presenting the bill on the floor? It's up to you. You're the prime sponsor. Would you like somebody here or would you rather Senator Nethercott do it? Talk to her. If she doesn't want to do it, I think we can handle this complicated bill. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Halloran. Okay, next, let's talk about occupational therapy licensure compact. I believe Representative Kinner's here to talk to us today. Welcome to Labor and Health, Representative Kinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. It's really great to be with you here this morning on the Senate side, and I haven't had very many opportunities to come before you in Labor and Health over here. So this is good. I'm really happy to be here. Senator Pappas was here and had to get to a Zoom meeting that he could not miss, but he wanted to testify and share with you that he has looked at this and has helped me with this bill and is certainly in favor of it. I do have several folks online that we might need to rely on for some, if you have some technical questions that I perhaps can't answer. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to just do a quick overview of what we're trying to accomplish with the Occupational Therapy Compact. And then I don't plan to go through the whole bill because I think you're probably familiar with compacts and so I know you recently looked at one. So the compact things would be very much similar to the one that you looked at recently. Now, speaking specifically of the Occupational Therapy Compact, I became interested in it because a constituent of mine brought a situation actually here in Cheyenne, and she's actually online. And when we have a moment, she would like to testify about the thing that sort of brought this up, and then how her interest in the compact came about, and then we also have some technical folks. But so I'll just share a few thoughts here. So this Occupational Therapy Compact really will be in form and function very similar to other ones that we are familiar with. For example, the Nurse Licensure Compact, the Physical Therapy Compact, and the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact. So this compact would authorize in-person practice and something I'm very interested in, and telepractice based on valid, unrestricted home state licenses. And so that would be a license from here in our state. The occupational compact will take place. It's not in place yet. There recently, I was hoping when I began this, there were only 9 states. We need 10 for the compact to come together. And about a month ago now, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago now, a 10th state approved it. And I was hoping that we might become the 10th state and to help the compact, actually go into place. But now one thing I might mention, that we're early enough now that if we approve this, and that I hope that at the end of our discussion, you will agree with me that this will be beneficial to Wyoming and to the folks that could be taken care of by these additional occupational therapists. But we're early enough that with our approval, we can be actively involved in the rulemaking of the compact, which I think would be very beneficial to Wyoming and would help us set a really good base for that. So we do have 10. There are 13 states that are looking at it. So 12 others in addition to Wyoming right now. The closest is Colorado, and I think there's someone online that can speak to the other adjacent states that are either looking at it or that have approved it. I did have a map, and I'm sorry I didn't send that map out to you prior to our meeting this morning, but I will provide that to you so you could see the states. And it appears to be an effort that sort of started in the east and has kind of come a little further west. And so it's kind of fun to see that. This effort is certainly supported by many different associations and certainly the national board. So what are some of the benefits? Well, the one that I'm really interested in is improving access to occupational therapy services, and that's by being able to recruit occupational therapists. I'm very interested in the telehealth, and this was something that I really didn't understand until I really got into it, that this really supports military spouses. And so thinking about here in Cheyenne, as our military folks are relocated around the country, some of their spouses are occupational therapists. And so as they're moved, this would make it a little more seamless for them to go ahead and begin to work if they have their license in their home state, and then they're traveling to a compact member state. And so that's something that I was really excited to find out, and even heard of a situation where a spouse of someone that was here at the Air Force base, that they could have already taken advantage of this. And so I thought, wow, that's awesome. One thing to keep in mind is that this compact has no impact on the state's scope of practice. And this is certainly not a takeover of our state regulatory authority. So I feel comfortable in that we're not giving those things up. I want to mention a couple things that came up in our discussions down the hall, just to provide some additional information. So one of the questions was, how many occupational therapists do we have in Wyoming? Well, we have 433 that are licensed. We have 159 occupational therapy assistants. Let's see, another question came up about, could we get out of a compact if we want to? And yes, there are provisions for getting out of the compact. It requires a process of about 6 months, but it can be done if a state decided to. So then the question came up about, well, of all the compacts that are out there, how many states have ever, gotten out of a compact? And in our research, we found out that there was one state that has gotten out of a compact, and I didn't have a chance to find out what it was and why they got out. But I think of all 50 states and of all the compacts out there, that to me seems pretty good, that it's not something that people are really desiring to get out of, which might mean that there are enough advantages for having that. We do in fact have a school in Wyoming, in the city, in the center of the state at the community college. They have an occupational therapy assistant program. So we do have training here in the state, and they're also able to get a master's, although I think it's going more towards to be an occupational therapist, that's going to require more of a doctorate than a master's degree. But in the occupational therapy assistants, they can perform the therapy, but they can't do any diagnostic work. So let's see. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a pretty good overview. I might see if there are any questions at this point, and then we can, with your encouragement, we can go in any direction that you would like, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. I know I have a question. Let's hear Senator Bouchard's question first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the one question that I have, because you kind of touched on it there, is when we, this is opposite of reciprocity because we're reaching out into the other states. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's in this bill, we could have done at the state level and we could have let people in, but that's a whole other story of how
Right.
much of a fight that is.
Right.
But you said something about changing the levels of education. And that bothers me, that maybe there's a possibility that we increase by having to work with the other states. We change that level. So I want to know if that's where we're at with that. I mean, if we're able to license people here at one level, and now as we get into a compact, we've got to change that to meet a different standard, that concerns me. So do you have a
Very, very good question, Senator, and
Go
thank
ahead,
you for that.
Representative Kenner. Through the chair.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I'm actually going to ask if it's okay to defer that answer for a moment for someone online that's more familiar with the compact and working with the levels of other states. So we will make a note of that question and make sure that we answer that for you satisfactorily.
And we can do the same with my question. My question was, if an individual practitioner, an individual occupational therapist does not want to participate in this compact, they are free, and like with our other compacts, they don't have to join. They can practice, they can get their Wyoming license and not have to deal with the other states. And I believe that's the case, but I wanted to confirm that.
I also believe that's the case, but I think some of the folks online will be able to really answer that more than I can.
Very good. If there's not any questions, we'll move on to the testimony. Senator Hutchins, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Kiner, my question is kind of, I think, on the same level as Senator Bouchard's. I was wondering, when you guys have the compacts, you have the 9 different states so far, do you guys try to join in with states that have similar education levels, requirements, and so on and so forth? Thank you.
Representative Kenner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, my understanding is that part of the compact is that there is a base of requirements that would be agreed upon standard of the states. And I do want our speakers to answer that more specifically, as because they certainly work with this on a daily basis. So if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
That would be great. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move ahead. Department, wish to comment? No comment. You guys are off the hook today. Okay, let's go ahead in the room. Anybody else in the room want to testify to this bill? You looked anxious to come up, so come on up and introduce yourself. You may be able to answer some of those questions that were asked. Go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know what's good and what's bad.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Greg Searles. I'm one of the executive directors from the A&I Professional Licensing Board Office and the executive director for the Occupational Therapy Board. The board is in support of this bill. They had no concerns with it. To answer a couple of the questions that have been asked, You are correct, Mr. Chairman, that someone can just have a Wyoming license and does not have to join the compact should they not choose to. And Senator Bouchard, you raised the question about the change in education. If there's a change in education that would change the compact would have to be readopted by the states, just like the nursing compact just had to do. This sets an established standard. If there's any major significant change to it, all the states would have to readopt those changes. Otherwise, the existing standard would remain in place for compact privileges. And this not only allows people in Wyoming with an OT license to practice in another state, but it allows those in another compact state to provide services to those here in Wyoming by not having to go through a full application process and providing documentation to Wyoming. They would apply to the Compact Commission, typically online, that is done. And if this is set up as similar to other compacts that have privileged practice, they would get online, fill out that information, pay their fees, and that privilege would be automatic. There wouldn't be a waiting period, anything like that. It would be pretty much instantaneous. With that, I would stand for any questions.
Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want you
So-
to know, Senator McEwen, that I got your name right. We still need to train other members of the Senate, but I get it right every time now.
I appreciate that. It's the little things. So let's say we have 12 states in the compact and we want to change the educational requirements or any other rules for that matter. And 9 states want to change and 3 don't. Where does that go? Because now we're below 10. Is the compact dead if the 3 don't go along with it? Or are the 3 kind of forced to go along with it? Just not sure how I see that working out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen, if 10 states did not readopt it, well, let me back up for a second. Because it would be a truly another compact, they could set a different level of how many states have to adopt it. They could go from 10 to 5, or they could go to 15. It's because it's would be a completely new compact at that point. They can reset that at any level. So if 10 states didn't join it with that educational change, then there would not be a compact.
Further questions, Senator Hutchins.
And sir, I didn't get your name.
Greg Searles,
Greg?
yes.
Okay, thank you. Someone emailed and they had a few questions. So they kind of like, "Ooh, let me ask these questions and see if we can get some answers to it." Is there a fee that Wyoming has to pay to join in on this compact?
Chairman Baldwin, Senator
Membership.
Hutchins. Yes, the state of Wyoming would be required to pay an annual fee. We don't know what that fee is at this point. That would be set by the commission, that now that there's 10 states, they can start setting those rules and fees. And as Representative Kinner said, being part of that commission to help set up those fees is an important factor so that Wyoming is heard when it comes to setting those fees.
Follow up, Senator Hutchins.
So would the fees come out of the state's budget, or would they come out of the occupational therapist licensure board, or the members getting together and saying, okay, we want to join this compact because maybe I want to move to Colorado, so we're going to pay such and such amount of money, and that's where the fees are coming from?
Chairman Baldwin, Senator Hutchins, their occupational therapy board is self-sufficient and special funded. They receive no general fund dollars. All their fees are collected through licensing, renewal, verification fees, things like that. And so they're autonomous in their own budget. And so the fees that are required to be paid as part of the compact would come out of their budget on an annual basis.
Thank you.
Further questions, committee? Okay, thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else in the room that wishes to testify to the bill? Apparently not. Let's move online. And the screen is full of faces, and I don't have my computer in front of me, so if you can help me out with the names.
Mr. Chairman, we have Mr. Dan and Miss Tammy currently on with their video.
Okay, you go ahead and let one of them know who you would like to be first.
Let's go with Tammy. She was admitted first.
Okay, proceed. Welcome to Labor and Health.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. This is the second time I've been before this committee discussing occupational licensure compacts and their benefits for the Department of Defense. My name is Tammy Perot, and I am the Northwest Regional Liaison for the Defense State Liaison Office, working under the direction for the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Military, Community, and Family Policy. Because you've heard from me before talking about compacts, I will not repeat my full testimony on the benefits of compacts, but I do want to highlight several things and why the department supports these. First off, we support occupational licensure compacts for their benefits for our military spouses as they are moving from state to state. This provides them the greatest opportunity to smoothly transition and maintain their employment. As you may know, 34% of our military spouses require a license to maintain employment, and occupational licensure compacts are the best way, the gold standard for our military spouses to be able to move from state to state. Additionally, this helps our veterans and our military members as they also are moving from state to state to maintain licensure that they may need outside of the federal facilities. The military departments see this as so important that they have made licensure explicitly clear as they consider the availability of licensure reciprocity when evaluating future basing or mission alternatives. For example, the Air Force has created a scorecard where they will consider licensure reciprocity and compacts to when they are looking at basing decisions for their wings, for their aircraft, and determining whether a state is an appropriate site for that. This was codified in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2020. Military spouses are a cross-section of the American population, but they move more frequently. And occupational licensure compacts support not just our military spouses, but they support everyone in that occupation. So this compact brought before you today, the Occupational Therapy Compact, will support all occupational therapists. Removing barriers, creating reciprocity and licensing requirements, and facilitating placement opportunities helps our military families' financial stability. So many of our military spouses and military families want to have two incomes to achieve their hopes and dreams. And we believe that enabling that is part of our responsibility. It helps ensure that our military stands ready and we have the retention opportunities that we need for our military service members. We appreciate Representative Kinner's sponsorship of this legislation, and I stand for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, committee? Thank you for coming back to our committee again. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move up to our upper right-hand corner. He looks like he's ready to testify. I believe he's just unmuted. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, the members of the committee. I'm Dan Logston. I'm the director of the National Center for Interstate Compacts at the Council of State Governments. We provide technical assistance for projects like these, so I want to try to answer some of the questions that the committee had and that Representative Kinner referred. So the states out west that are considering the compact right now are Colorado, Nebraska, Utah, Arizona, and Washington. So the compact's pending passage in those states. As to the education levels, this compact, like PT, because the occupational therapist boards and the associations have done such a terrific job over the years of syncing up requirements in state, this compact relies on a valid unencumbered license in the state. So the compact doesn't speak to any sort of education level because the states have already handled that. So it can just, like PT, it can just rely on the fact that you have a valid unencumbered license in the state and you're able to participate in. To your question, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chairman, it is voluntary. So if I was a licensed occupational therapist in Wyoming, and I had a license also in Colorado, even though if those two states were in the compact, I could still keep that Colorado license or vice versa. Nothing's mandatory about the compact. I want to speak to the fee. Mr. Searles was correct in that there will likely be some cost to Wyoming to interface with the compact data system in the same way that nursing and PT and speech pathology and audiology will have that initial cost. But like all those compacts, the compact commission can impose a fee, but it's not necessarily, it's not mandatory. Right now, the only compact that assesses member states is the nursing compact, and that's $6,000 a year. So I know with PT and others, they've tried to avoid that by relying on support from like the Federation of Boards of Physical Therapy. I think this compact commission and its member states will do that as well, look for grant opportunities, et cetera. So there will be initial cost for the data system interface, but there's not a mandatory fee in any way for the state of Wyoming. Representative Kenner mentioned the state that left one of these licensure compacts. New Hampshire pulled out of the EMS compact last year. And Representative Kenner also mentioned the process for leaving the compact, and he's correct. Wyoming can vote itself out of the compact. The 6 months he referenced, that could very likely be negotiated down. You just want to give those practitioners and those clients an opportunity to find a new occupational therapist or occupational therapy assistant, or decide that, well, I'm doing a lot of work in Colorado, or I'm doing a lot of work in Nebraska. I'm going to go ahead and get licensed there. So happy to attempt to answer any other questions that the committee has as well.
Senator Bouchard, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to get back on the fees here. So part of what I see here is we have a delegate that's involved. I want to know how if they're paid or where that comes from. And
Okay.
also if we're going to have to pay out of general fund, I mean, that's where I'm having a problem. If this is something that licensees want, they should be the ones that's where that cost should come from. So I kind of want to know what those costs are. I don't want to just say that there's a cost and we're going to pass the bill to find out what it is.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yes, thank you. As to the delegate, that is an officer of the state board. It's typically the board administrator, but it could also be a board member. We gave that option. With all the other licensure compacts, the commission picks up the tab for that participation. There's not a salary or anything for the delegate. It's an added duty for them to participate in the compact commission. And again, this follows what nursing and PT and medicine and the speech compact will also do. As far as the cost, and I think if you looked at PT and nursing and others, that's typically borne by the state board. The state board is responsible for implementing this. Not aware that if the state board doesn't get any general fund allocations, I don't think the compact could encumber the general fund in any way. I'll leave that to Mr. Searles. But in the other states that have adopted these compacts, typically, unless there's in some states, the boards aren't independent and they don't have an independent source of revenue, all that flows into the general fund. But that doesn't appear to be the case here in Wyoming.
And I would look to the audience here. I know I saw some head shakes. If you want to come up, sir, just clarify that question for us.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard, there are no general fund dollars used to support the occupational boards in the state of Wyoming. It's all special funds through licensing, renewal, and other fees assessed by the board.
Go ahead, Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I mean, am I to understand that if there are costs that are incurred, you guys are going to raise the price of the licensees or something out of the licensees, so that way the taxpayer is not going to be on the hook for it?
Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard, under the compact, the board is allowed to assess a privilege to practice fee to those that are coming from outside states into Wyoming. to be able to practice in Wyoming, so that we'll be able to cover some of those costs that may be assessed to the board as being part of the compact.
Further questions, committee? Senator Furphy. Address who you want the question to here. We got a variety of people in front of us now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, not that occupational therapy may cause major problems, but asking about malpractice insurance. Do any of the compacts require malpractice insurance? And if a practitioner somehow injured someone else, would the compact be liable for that? And does the compact carry liability insurance? Thank you.
Anyone who wishes to answer that, go ahead, Dan.
I'll attempt to do that. There's nothing explicit in these compacts, maybe medicine, but that's one I don't typically work with, that requires malpractice insurance, but practitioners are required to follow the Practice Act, the standard of care requirements, and the laws and regs around practice in the member states. So if it is that I have to carry malpractice insurance to practice in Wyoming, I would certainly have to do that. I would imagine that if I'm coming into a state, I'm going to be a part of a practice where they're going to want to either include me under their umbrella plan, or they're going to make it a requirement that I do that. But there's nothing explicitly in the compact that says that. Just because you don't want to get down to that sort of granular level, you want to leave that to the states to decide. And as far as liability goes, certainly the compact commission, I don't believe, would be liable in that instance. That would all fall on the practitioner. The compact explicitly says, and the compact commission website that'll be issuing these privileges on behalf of the member states will, explain to the practitioner and give them plenty of notice that, when you're practicing in that state, it's up to you to understand the laws and regs. And if you run afoul of the board, they can take action against you in the same way they can take action against someone that they issued a license to. So they would be liable for that. The compact commission, I don't believe would be liable for that. But I'm not an attorney.
And you didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express.
That's right. That's right.
Further questions, committee? Okay, thank you very much, Dan, for your testimony. And I apologize to our other testifiers here. I have a hard time reading your name across the room. I'm going to say Miss Parker. Would I be correct? Nobody's acknowledging that. So help me out.
Her name is, which one?
Shelley, I'm hearing that you made it up here. Go ahead, Shelley.
Okay. Whoa.
Lots of feedback from somewhere there.
Mr. Chairman, if she has YouTube or another browser
Yeah,
with the
if you
webinar
have,
going on.
if you have something else going there, YouTube or something else going in the room, you need to shut that down while you testify. Now you're muted. We can't hear you.
Are we good?
There you go. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, Shelley. Go ahead and testify. You can't hear us. Can you hear us now, Shelley?
I can.
The feeding back. Something else is open there. I don't know what's going on. We can hear you fine when you were testifying, when you were unmuted before without the feedback.
Is that better?
It's very creative, but no. There you go.
Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I apologize for not being there in person today. I had a family matter come up.
Can you introduce yourself, ma'am?
So my name is Shelley Smith. I am from Sheridan. I'm an occupational therapist and own 4 clinics across the state, one in Sheridan, one in Gillette, one in Casper, and one in Cheyenne. I'm also the legislative chair for the Wyoming Occupational Therapy Association. And we were approached by AOTA regarding trying to get the compact passed. And so I contacted Representative Kinner and asked if he would sponsor, which obviously he did. As a practitioner, this compact would help in many ways. During the pandemic, we really learned the value of being able to do remote therapy. We believe that that's not the best way to practice, but there have been situations that has allowed us to continue therapy with our kids. We see children only. The issues that have come up with that, though, is that because we are a rural state and because many of my clinics are on state lines, for example, if we had a patient in Cheyenne that was coming from a border town in Colorado, we weren't able to do telehealth with them because we weren't licensed in Colorado. So in that situation, that could be really helpful. We are finding now that with those patients that come across state lines, sometimes there's things that don't allow them to come, such as weather and illness in the family, those kinds of things. And we would be able to have that continuity of care and continue that through telehealth until that situation was remedied. As a business owner, there is a shortage of occupational therapists in the state of Wyoming. We find it difficult to recruit, and particularly for the Cheyenne clinic, we end up hiring a lot of therapists from Colorado who then have to go through the Wyoming licensing process. All of my clinicians have to be credentialed through insurance, which is a lengthy process. So if we had this compact, we would be able to get that credentialing process through quicker and get those therapists rolling sooner in patient care. Another place that OTs are widely utilized is in the school systems. And again, having this compact, having states in the compact and therapists coming from those states, we would be able to get therapists going in a much quicker fashion. Another benefit of it is the practitioners that are in home health care. Again, we have those small communities that may reside right outside of our borders. It would allow those therapists to practice without having to maintain another license in another state. So it would improve that rural access to therapy. Another thing that I really appreciate about this compact is that it does require background checks. The state of Wyoming does not require background checks for licensing. Sorry, dog bells. The joys of working from home. Lost my train of thought. Oh, so that background check, I think, just adds another level of safety for our patient care. Again, our licensing does not require background checks. They do ask questions about, whether you're a felon, and it's a yes or no question. So I really feel like that allows us more safety in our profession. I do really appreciate as well that it doesn't take away my personal choice as a practitioner. I can still decide to only hold a Wyoming license, but should I decide to join the compact, I can do that as well. As to the question that came up about levels of education, I think what Representative Kinner was referring to is not necessarily licensing board requirements, but that a lot of our educational programs are heading towards doctorate degrees for occupational therapists and bachelor's degrees for certified occupational therapy assistants, which has kind of also been the trend around physical therapy and speech therapy as well. That is all I have. I would stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. Across the room and got the jog. That was my only exercise for this morning. Thank you very much. Questions, committee? Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ma'am, Mrs. Shelley, since you were the one who initiated this compact, I'm wondering when you get close to pages 30, 31, it talks about borrowing money, 32, you can sell, convey, mortgage, pledge, lease, exchange. In a compact, I'm wondering, what is all this about? Leasing and purchasing, receiving gifts? Can you fill me in on that?
If you can, Shelley. If not, I
If you
believe we've
can.
got somebody here at the podium again.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I do not have the answer to that question.
Very good. Let's go to the table here.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchins, I believe that's in reference to the commission's ability to, per se, have an office and rent space. And should they purchase a building, be able to take a mortgage out for that purpose, and those kind of things. That's in reference to the compact commission and their abilities to be able to operate an office.
Correct. And I believe that doesn't refer to anything in state. That refers to the commission. And I would remind the committee as well that being a compact, we're unable to change any, and not that we were going to, but we can't change any of the language in the compact, or it becomes void. So anyway, further questions for Shelley, committee? Nope. Thank you very much. I'm curious, since your dog didn't identify himself, what was the dog's name?
That is Bandit.
Bandit. Thank you for testifying, Bandit. We appreciate it. Okay,
Thank
let's
you.
move on. Let's move on to what the remaining person on testify here. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Megan Pudler. I'm a state affairs manager at the American Occupational Therapy Association. Thank you for your opportunity today to provide supporting testimony for HB 117, which would establish the Occupational Therapy Licensure Compact. I hopefully won't keep you for too long. I'm just going to really reiterate what a lot of folks said here today. This legislation would create a licensure compact for occupational therapy in Wyoming. Legislation has been signed into law in 10 other states and is currently pending in 13 states during this legislative session. 3 of those are actually pending governor approval. Furthermore, Wyoming has enacted several licensure compacts for other professions such as physicians, nursing, EMS, and audiologists and speech language practitioners. Essentially, a licensure compact will allow someone to be licensed in their home state. So here, for example, Wyoming, and then obtain a privilege to practice in other states that have also joined the compact. A practitioner wishing to obtain this privilege would apply to the compact commission if they have a valid license, no problems with their license, and they'll be able to practice in other states. This is almost a one-stop shop, if you will, and really speeds up the process for licensure. It'll benefit those in Wyoming as well as those in other states. In addition to practitioners in the state of Wyoming be able to practice in another state, practitioners coming from other states will be able to easily get licensed in Wyoming as well. The overall goal of the compact is to create benefits for patients, occupational therapy practitioners, and others. It'll improve access to occupational therapy services. As we've seen with the pandemic, telehealth has really taken off. So this will allow someone with a license in Wyoming to provide services via telehealth. It'll allow more choice in providers. It'll preserve and enhance the licensure system. Licensure boards will have access to a system that makes sure that someone entering their state has a criminal background check and has been vetted. It'll increase communication between states. If there's a violation in one state, it must be reported and requires the state boards to work together. It'll also allow military personnel and spouses to more easily maintain their certifications when relocating, like we heard earlier. It'll improve continuity of care. If someone receives care in Wyoming and crosses state lines, their occupational therapist could follow up with them easily. And the OT compact preserves the regulatory authority of each compact member state to protect the public health and safety through the existing state regulatory structure. So thank you all for your consideration today.
Questions, committee, Senator Hutchins.
You spoke quickly on the continuity of care. When you say that, is there some type of database that's going to be established that says, I am getting occupational therapy here in Wyoming and I moved to Utah? Is there some way somehow that someone there is going to know what kind of care that I'm receiving to provide that continuity of care? Is there a database?
Go ahead, ma'am.
That's a great question. There is a database for the overall compact and those who have a license to practice within that. But in terms of continuity of care, what I'm speaking to is, for example, we saw during the pandemic, folks moved to be closer to family. And so when they crossed that state line, their practitioner couldn't follow them if they didn't have a license in that other state, unless there were some flexibilities in states that allowed that. So this continuity of care, if that was the case, if you had your license in Wyoming and you were caring for a patient in Wyoming and they moved across the state line to Colorado, which is a compact member state, a practitioner could get a license in Colorado quickly and be able to still serve their patient versus having to hand that off to someone else or have them find someone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, further questions, Senator McEwen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many states that surround Wyoming are going to be part of this compact? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Great question. So far, the states that have enacted the compact near Wyoming is just Colorado. But the legislation is pending in Utah. It actually is waiting approval for the governor, and it also is pending in Nebraska. We just started introducing in 2021, and so 10 states enacted during that legislative session. Wisconsin was the most recent, and then including Wyoming, we have legislation pending in 12 other states. So for the ones nearby, it's Colorado, and then we're hopeful for Utah and Nebraska.
Thank you. Further questions, committee? And those ones that are pending, and anybody here can answer that. Do they include any of the other surrounding states, Montana, Idaho? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the map online right now, and no, the states that have been mentioned, I'd be happy to walk around and show you this map if you'd like to see it very quickly. But no, the states that have been mentioned are the only ones in this area currently.
Okay, and still fairly new, of course, starting in 2021. So very good. Further questions, committee? No further questions. Thank you very much for your testimony. Any further online? No one else online? Anybody else in the room which wishes to testify? Go ahead. Come on. Okay, we'll get this testimony. We'll bring it in. Go ahead, Mr. Bully.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Eric Boley, President of the Wyoming Hospital Association, and just wanted to testify briefly on this bill. We think this is good legislation and it's important for our state. We've been big supporters of all the other compacts. We actually helped with the nursing compact when we passed that one several years ago. We were also instrumental in helping getting the EMS compact passed, and both of those have been vitally important over the years, but even more so during the last 2 years as we faced the pandemic. One of the questions I think that you asked Senator Hutchins, as far as continuity of care, occupational therapy is super important in hospitals. It's what's used to help people recover from surgeries and injuries so that they can thrive and live at home, and so they can resume their lives and go back to work. And because we've been facing so many shortages, these trained professionals have been hard to find. And I think we're going to continue to see that, trying to recruit them into our state. So the compact actually makes it better for us and gives us the ability to treat those patients and improve their lives. When we talk about continuity of care, it doesn't necessarily mean moving from one place to another. It means after they come out of surgery and they're recovering, we continue their care and get them better so they can go home and thrive. So I think that's an important distinction to make as well. And those records would be kept in, especially in a hospital setting or in a physician office, they'd be kept in the electronic health record and then would be transportable if necessary. So with that, we stand in strong support of this bill, and I'd be willing to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions specifically for Mr. Boley? No questions. Thanks, sir. Committee, we have questions for anyone you want out there. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe Mr. Boley can answer this question.
If he can't, he can call for a lifeline.
So it looks to me like we went through COVID and we opened it up, for licenses to be a little bit more portable. And then all of a sudden now we get to a point where we go, well, wait a minute, that worked out pretty good. Is that really is that some of what's going on here? Could these people actually practice under the emergency COVID rules across state lines like other practitioners could? Or because I think the public, and we get emails, saying don't do this, but I don't think the public maybe understands what's happening, and we're trying to create another layer of government. But I think we saw a lot of the portable license things coming across state lines, telemed. And now that we've gone through that, it's people have realized that's a pretty good deal. So I think that's also opened this up for discussions for more compacts. So.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard, I see your point, but that if we take the pandemic out of the equation, we're about to end the public health emergency. I think the governor's decided on the 15th that that'll end. So some of the easements that took place during the pandemic will go away. But even before then, the compacts were super, super important. I mean, we've been facing shortages in nursing. We've been facing problems with EMS where we've got EMS that have to travel out of state, and without that licensure compact, they have liability concerns if they go across to a state that's a non-compact state. I just think that this is kind of the wave of the future, because we're gonna be facing shortages in just about every specialty, and I don't see it getting better. And so I think what this does is allows us to be able to have trained professionals, and telemedicine needs to be much more important and utilized more than it has been. And so there are safeguards put in place here. There's licensure and all the things that are necessary, but compacts actually make it easier for us to have trained professionals to treat patients across the state.
Follow up, Senator Bouchard.
Maybe I didn't communicate right. I'm trying to give you a window here of saying we probably allowed people to practice across state lines more so during the pandemic. So I think it's become, now it's like, hey, this worked out great. Why don't we do more of this? So that's what I'm saying. That's what we're doing here, is saying, it did work out great. So let's do some more. So that's where I was trying to give you the window. But
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard, I agree with you. But I'll also tell you, there were waivers that were in place that could be used, but they can't now. And so this allows us to do that.
I say, actually, COVID did some good things for us. I hate to say that, but it's true.
Bite your tongue.
COVID did some good things.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions or comments, committee? No one else in the audience wish to testify. We'll close this to public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Who moved it? Moved by Senator Bouchard, second by Senator Furphy. Very good. Discussion on the bill. As you know, it's compact. We can't change much on the bill. Question being called. Let's take roll.
House Bill 117. Senator Bouchard.
Aye.
Senator Furphy.
Aye.
Senator Hutchins.
Aye.
Senator McCune.
Aye.
Chairman Baldwin.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Thank you very much, Representative Kinner. I believe Senator Papp is just going to carry this for you on the floor.
He is.
And we'll
Thank you
we'll
very
back
much.
him up able-bodiedly.
Okay.
Thank you very
committee.
much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Representative Larson, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We love seeing you in labor and health, by the way. It's where you belong.
I request that Glenn Reed of Department of A&I meet the director for the Board of Psychology joins.
Absolutely. You can ask as many as 3 people up there. We have extra chairs. Proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it is good to be with you. And House Bill 110, I want to give you some history to help you understand what we do in the bill is really not too difficult, but understanding the history is important for you to understand why it's necessary. About 2 years, well, in 2019, the state hospital, as they was completing their construction of the new facility and was adjusting their staff to meet some of the new needs. They wanted to increase the number of behavioral analysts that they have. Their behavioral analysts help develop recommendations for people with behavioral challenges to adapt to the environment that they're in, and have been using behavioral analysts there and at the Wyoming Life Resource Center for a number of years. We also use these behavioral analysts in school districts to help write the IEPs, as well as around the state, providing personal services for behavioral analysis. And when the superintendent made the request for these positions, he was told from the Department of A&I that we don't have behavioral analysts, and statutorily, there's not a licensure for them. And so then on reviewing the statutes, they found that the only place where there was a reference to behavioral analysis was in the Psychologists Act. And if we were to comply with statutes, then anyone providing those types of services would need to be a doctor of psychology. They realized that we've had these behavioral analysts practicing in the state with advanced degrees in counseling, psychology, a master's degree in psychology and social work and the like. But to comply, they says, this is what you would need to do. And they understood that. They got an AG opinion. The AG says, we get it too, but until we change it, that would be the requirement. So the superintendent of the Life Resource Center, as they're getting ready to likewise to implement the staffing with the changed mission in Lander, to particularly on the dual diagnosed folks to come to that campus, have been anticipating being able to have these behavioral analysts on staff. And this causes a real challenge, as you can imagine, with the number of psychologists that are available and the costs associated with them. And so he asked if we could try to rectify the problem and get a licensure act in place. I reached out to Joanne here, and she walked me through and helped me understand and where this the Board of Psychology and had identified this problem a couple of years ago as well, and they knew that it existed and it was on their radar to correct as well. So I reached out to the association, the Psychologists Association, wondering if they were supportive of these folks providing this service who were not doctors of psychology. And the answer I got was that they too recognize that this was a flaw in our statute, and that they, because that behavioral analysis had been part of their act since the beginning of time, that's kind of some stuff they dealt with, and that having these behavioral analysts with master's degree has been something that has been accepted in practice for a long time, and that they had polled their members and felt that it would be reasonable to bring that behavioral analyst component into their act. So we kind of settled that problem. So then we reached out to behavioral analysts and said, you know, if we bring this into this act, how would that look? And so we looked at the Behavioral Analyst Act in Utah, Montana, Missouri, Arizona, tried to find the components of that act and worked with their national association in California to kind of address and look on and see what a licensure act would look at. And then working with the board certified, the BCBA, the Board Certified Behavioral Analysts Association, and the Psychologists Association and their national association, we've, along with the Department of Health, the Department of Education, we've put this bill together. So Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll walk through the bill now that you kind of understand the history. And I think it would probably, the beginning of it is we put in the requirements for licensure for behavioral analysis, and talk about what that would entail. And there's two components. You've got a behavioral analysis and you've got an assistant behavioral analyst, I'm sorry, and talks about how that would work. We get into, on page 3, we get into the exceptions of behavioral analysis and who that would be. Those are kind of important to look at. So if you already have a member of another recognized profession that is licensed or regulated to provide these, such as a psychologist, they would not have to be licensed under this act. Or and so we've got a psychologist, we have a behavioral analyst, including one who is an animal behavioralist. I didn't know what those, anyway, they exist and they're exempt for the guidelines of their profession. If you've got somebody in a corporation, in a company that's providing behavioral analysis advice to the company, that's exempt as long as they're not prescribing it to an individual. If you're teaching or doing research, if you're enrolled in a college or university for who's applied behavioral analysis activities are part of the program, you're exempt. An unlicensed person who is pursuing that experience, same as and then we get down at the bottom of page 5 and we talk about behavioral technician, because a board certified behavioral analysis or may use a technician to carry out the prescription that they've had them to do. And so we define what that behavior technician does, and they're exempt as long as they're working under the direction of a behavioral analyst. Then, of course, a caregiver. If you had a mother or a parent or a child or family member, and the behavioral analyst had prescribed some direction there for you to carry out, you are exempt from having to be licensed. We go into section 2, and we talk about background checks, and that is similar. We had to change the Psychologist Act a little bit to bring this in. They were fine with that. Talks about fingerprinting. We talk about certification for board analysts or for behavioral analysts. Currently, the board certified behavioral analysts, there's one organization that does that. We don't spell that out specifically, but we say that those boards or entities that certify need to be accredited by the National Commission on Certifying Agencies or the American National Standards Institute or similar successor, like we've done in other practice acts that we brought in that we've not, as some of these professional standards come and go, we didn't want to be specifically tied to one in case it disappeared. We talk about the license. We define a licensed assistant behavioral analyst and a licensed behavioral analyst. And then we define what the practice of behavioral analysis is on the top of page 10. When we bring this into the board of psychology at the bottom of page 10, the total board numbers stay at 9. We, in visiting with the board, we found that it's been difficult to have that board completely staffed with the non-professional components. And so what this does is it keeps 6 licensed psychologists, 2 licensed behavioral analysts, and 1 public member. And what we've done away with is the 2 public members and 1 psychological practitioner. That was done with the blessing of the association. Then we talk about the terms, the length of terms to serve on the board. And then we put in a provision there, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, because we don't have a Licensure Act in here, but yet you're going to have some behavioral analysts on there while this takes place. So we give them a provision that they can serve on the board, not as licensed behavioral analysts, as this is in place with the expectation that that would be accomplished within that first term, and then that problem solved moving forward. We do the criminal history. When we get into the Practice Act, we start doing some conforming work there to bring behavioral analysts into the Practice Act. We talk about the request for criminal history and background check every 2 years that we had some discussion on the House side on the frequency of that. Again, that was the board said we're comfortable with that. They like it. If they would have said 5 years, we'd have been okay with 5 years. If they'd said 1 year, we'd been fine. This was the number we give them, and hence we've kept at that. And then the remaining adds BAs into conforms our existing statutes to put behavioral analysts or assistant behavioral analysts into the Psychologist Practice Act. And Mr. Chairman, the last thing that I would talk about is the repealers on page 20, and which talks, we reduce the terms of the board and bring some new language in that we've shown on page 12. And then there's some language, some old archaic language that talks about people in this practice. It uses the term that they're honest and something else, which is of course up to definition, and so or opinion. And so we delete that and make that compliant. So that was kind of some cleanup language. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and Mrs. Reed could certainly answer those that I can.
Very good question, Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see the overall use of the bill. I mean, I believe it or not, I volunteered in a state hospital. They had what they called developmental specialists, which was an old term. And they used to have to bring them back in on a retirement when they had a shortage. And so there was a lot of different licenses that they had to use or utilize. Where I have a question here is on page 4, where we're talking about, starting at line 14. An analyst that's or animal trainer who practices exclusively with non-humans. Why is that in this bill? Because I understand how we would apply this to the state hospital.
So remember that section is in the exemptions. And so we're saying somebody that is an animal behavioralist or an animal trainer does not have to be a licensed behavioral analyst to your point, work at the state hospital or work in a school district. And the concern was, and we picked this, I believe, out of a couple of the other practice acts, where evidently there were people who work with training animals that they said in dealing with the behaviors of the animals, and they come into question, well, are you a licensed behavioral analyst? So that's why that's there.
Follow up, Senator Bouchard.
Interestingly, in some of the state hospitals that were, severely retarded, blind, some of the best volunteers we had to come in were actually people that did horse training, because they actually, there's a lot of it was repetition. So that's why I saw that. And I know that, I don't know, probably licensees don't like to talk about this, but like I said, it was some of the best work we saw in the state hospital, for the people that were animal related, did some of the best work with people that were severely retarded. So anyway, that's just my little addition to this bill. But
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
And so I completely agree. At the Life Resource Center, there was that component where we used horses to help with behavior. But I think what they're doing here is segregating who's being trained for the behavior. And we're saying if you're training the horses is different than perhaps the behavioral analyst that said you would benefit from working with this livestock or this animal, and that's part of your behavioral. And I think that's where they're trying to segregate that.
Further questions coming in. Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, on page 3, I'm just curious when it talks about assistant behavior analyst may engage under the practice only under the supervision of a licensed behavior analyst. is there any limit to the number of assistants that a licensed behavior analyst can handle at one time?
Mr. Chairman, no, that's not defined in there. However, I think similar to what you see with other physicians that deal with physicians assistants or nurse practitioners or something, there is some liability that goes along with the, and so bearing in mind that you have to have some component there that you're comfortable with, and what I may feel comfortable with having under me may be different than you, but it's not, you are correct, it is not defined in the act.
Further questions of the representative? Saying none, thank you. Sam, would
Thank
you
you.
like to add anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have nothing to add.
Okay, good answer. Good answer. Okay. Others in the audience who wish to testify? The department will let Stefan jump in first. Which doesn't mean you can't come up and take another seat. Go ahead, Mr. Director.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Stefan Johansson with the Department of Health. I'll be brief in my comments here. Representative Larson did a great job explaining the background of where this bill came from and what it does. He's right that this came to our attention last year when, as we near completion of the Life Resource Center reconstruction project and the new mission that we have there to really take on a different clientele. We noticed that with the opinion of the AGs and the interpretation of how that was enforced through A&I with our positions, that we really didn't have the ability to continue employing our behavioral analysts that are on campus currently. So for us in the state, whether it's the state hospital or the Life Resource Center, it's more of an administrative problem to allow these folks to continue to practice and provide the services that we need. But the problem, as you heard from Representative Larson, is much bigger when you get out into our communities in the private sector, where, as I understand it, we have 30 or 40 behavioral analysts around the state in other capacities practicing, and for years have been seeking this type of clarity of how do we practice with the appropriate licensure and the appropriate oversight. And I think for all of us speaking with one voice, we would love to have PhD level psychologists in all of our facilities, especially in Evanston and Lander. But you all know, and we know how, and our communities and private sector partners know how difficult that can be to recruit and retrain and retain PhD level psychologists. So this is a huge help for us in the state. Really thankful for the work that Representative Larson and all of the stakeholders that got together in a short period of time, starting around Thanksgiving last year, that got together and got us to where we are today with this bill. So the department is very supportive of this. Members of the committee, I am joined here in the room by Matt Petrie, our administrator of the Behavioral Health Division, as well as Dr. Jeremy Forbes, who's available online. He is our superintendent of the Wyoming Life Resource Center, and the three of us are certainly here to answer any questions you might have about this bill and how it impacts the Department of Health. Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions, committee? Seeing none, looks like all three of you are off the hook. Further testimony from the audience. Welcome to Labor and Health, Mr. Hackman. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Dr. Hollis Hackman with the Wyoming Psychological Association. We support this bill. Behavior analysis is part of our scope of practice, but there aren't very many of us in the state. There's about 130 with a Wyoming address, and we get tied up doing all sorts of other things. And so with the advent of this national board certification and quantification of board certified behavior analysts, we're very supportive of having them get under the rubric of our board and be part of what we do, so that they're properly regulated and so that the public has a place to bring redress if it's needed. So we see this as a very beneficial sort of a bill that's going to increase access to care for folks in the state. So with that, I think I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Dr. Hackman? No questions. Thank you very much. Further testimony. two familiar faces to the committee. Go ahead, ladies.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lindsay Semino with the Wyoming Counseling Association. The Wyoming Counseling Association very much supports this bill. It has been known that ABA therapy is the gold standard for children with autism. And for our providers within the state who recommend ABA treatment for our clients, they are not able to receive it because this certification doesn't exist. And so we are very eager to see this certification move forward. We have been in conversations with Dr. Hackman in the formation of this bill and believe that it does meet the standards that we usually look for as far as education requirements and training requirements. And so I will be brief as well and stand for any questions.
Questions, committee? No, thank you very much. Ms. Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Andy Somerville, Executive Director for the Wyoming Association of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Centers. I'll be extraordinarily brief this morning and just say that WAMSAC supports this bill wholeheartedly. We worked with all of the stakeholders, and I hope this is one of those moments where it's kumbaya and everybody's in agreement, it seems to be. So we appreciate your work on this new licensure and would stand for any questions.
Thank you. We don't sing in this committee, but thank you for that thought. No, we don't sing in this committee ever. Any questions or thoughts, committee? Anybody else wish to testify? Seeing none. Committee, what's your pleasure?
I was going to testify here.
I see one. I'm sorry, I didn't look at the screen. Go ahead, sir.
That's okay. My name is Brad Dickey, and I'm actually a board certified behavior analyst. I was the second BCBA to move to the state of Wyoming. And I just wanted to give a little more information around what ABA is and why I support this bill. First off, I just want to say that I really appreciate you guys having me be here. And I fully support this bill by Representative Larson, and really appreciate everybody looking at this in more detail. So ABA, which stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis, is the science of understanding and changing behavior that focuses on the interactions of an individual and environmental events. And what we do helps to improve behaviors such as social skills, language, decrease in problematic behaviors, and increase in other forms of behavioral independence. And I think it's important to know that when this is designed, overseen, or implemented by somebody who's qualified, you can significantly improve the independence and the function of an individual. We work with individuals diagnosed with autism, developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, learning and communication disabilities, brain injuries, and other behavioral disorders such as ADHD. And I fully support this bill for a few reasons. So first off, I strongly believe in regulating the practice of behavioral analysis. I think that these methods are very powerful. They could be misused or abused by people who don't have the necessary training. I also strongly believe that this discipline needs to be regulated to maintain a high quality of care and ensure the safety of the public. I've also personally witnessed children being referred for this service by physicians throughout the state, and they're denied for this service because insurance companies refuse to cover it because we're not licensed in Wyoming. I personally know families that have had the painful decision to actually move out of this state to get the service in a different state. Most families cannot pay for these services out of pocket, and kids are not able to get this treatment. I also think it's extremely important to note that these services, like we talked about earlier, are considered evidence-based best practice treatment by the US Surgeon General, the American Psychological Association, and many other associations. This bill would rectify these problems and allow families to receive this service. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, committee? Again, I apologize for not seeing you on the screen. You're the easiest person to see, and I just didn't look that direction.
No problem.
No questions. Thank you very much for that testimony. No one else online? Okay. Okay, with that, we'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Senator Furphy, second by? Somebody want to second the bill? Second. Second by, that was by Senator McEwen. I need to turn and look at it. Okay. Discussion on the bill, committee. Thoughts, suggestions? See none. Oh, go ahead.
I was thinking about something the last presenter said that kind of threw a monkey wrench into this folks, but some big six, this is a technical question, just wondering why the behavioral definition of 7 was not this definition. It's just like I said, just a technical question why we did that on the bill.
Okay, anybody in the audience wish to answer that? Representative, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, when we went through the draft and we took this language from, a lot of the language was provided for us and reviewed it from the Behavioral Analysis Association in the board certification group. And we caught that we had this behavior technician in there, but it wasn't clearly defined. And so in crafting it, LSO suggested that we put it, we need to define this behavior technician because we just didn't know. And he recommended in crafting that this is where we put it, is we define how they're used. It wasn't. So that's the end.
It's no big deal. It was just more of a technical. it's like it's
They're
right
the
there.
pros. I'll take their word for it. Thank you. Any
Thank
further
you,
discussion or questions?
Representative
committee?
Larson.
Okay, no further questions.
Comment. I
Yes.
do thank the representative for his kind of giving us the history of the bill. That really helped. Appreciate that.
That's important. Okay, we appreciate you bringing a bill forward and certainly to me early. I wish we could have got it a little earlier and got it through the JAC, but that's okay. We'll get it through. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and call roll, Mike.
This is for House Bill 110. Senator Bouchard.
Aye.
Senator Furphy. Senator Hutchins. Senator McCune.
Aye.
Chairman Baldwin.
Aye.
Senate File 110, House Bill 110, 5 ayes.
Very good. And I will go ahead and floor manage it. Very good. Appreciate it. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.